This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. It is not intended to cause or induce breach of an existing agency agreement.
Hello? 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 This is the Vancouver
Commercial
Real Estate Podcast.
And welcome back to the Vancouver Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm Cory Wright, and I'm all you're going to get today. It's where we typically record on Fridays. It's Monday. Apparently, in the residential real estate world, realtors don't work on Mondays. So I've got no Melisa and I've got no Adam today. So it's just me. But we have an outstanding show today. We have Peter Mitham, who is the editor at the Western Investor. And if you listen to the program for a while, you'll realize usually late October, early November, we used to have our good friend Frank O'Brien join us, who unfortunately had passed away last year. And he'd come on and talk about the 5 markets that the Western Investor has pegged to keep an eye on for 2025. With Frank's unfortunate passing, Peter has now assumed the editor role at the Western Investor. And Peter's going to join us today to talk about their 5 markets that they're keeping an eye out for. But they have a little bit of a twist now. They haven't named or numbered them in any particular order, but we got 2 from BC, 1 from Alberta, 1 from Saskatchewan, and 1 from Manitoba, all of which the Western Investor covers, all those markets, to kind of unpack what they feel is the one, or in BC's case, the 2 markets to keep an eye on for 2025. So without further ado, let's get to our interview today with Peter Mitham, editor, Western Investor, breaking down 5 markets the Western Investor tells you to keep an eye on for 2025. This podcast is presented by Impact Commercial.
Impact Commercial, John, Alan, the team over there are fantastic. They've all been on the show.
They have, yeah.
Friends of the show.
Great guys.
Wealth of experience. They can help with all your commercial financing needs.
Whether it's owner-occupiers, land development funds, commercial investments, or multifamily, these guys got you covered.
And they recently obtained their CMHC correspondent lender status.
So for all your commercial lending needs, visit them at impactcommercial.ca.
That's impactcommercial.ca.
All right, today we're here with Peter Mitham, editor of the Western Investor. Peter, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. Another rainy day in Vancouver, but that's par for the course, isn't it?
Yeah, no, we can't complain. We have you on the program today because we're going to talk about the Western Investors' 5 markets they've kind of picked to keep an eye on for 2025. As you know, previously we've had the late Frank O'Brien join us the past couple of years. You're joining us this year to carry on the tradition. But before we get started with that, can you tell us maybe a little bit more about yourself, Peter, and how you ended up at the Western Investor?
Yeah. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, really, was brought on after the pandemic to assist Frank. As probably your listeners know, I was a longtime real estate columnist for Business in Vancouver.
Yep.
And began writing for the paper actually late 1998. So
Okay.
It's been about 26 years. And after Frank's illness and his untimely passing, stepped into the role of editor at Western Investor and have been working to continue his good work.
Well, we appreciate taking the time to come on. And like we said, Frank had joined us for the previous couple of years prior to this. We kind of made like an annual episode where we kind of break down what you guys had picked as 5 markets to watch out for next year. So without further ado, if we can get into that, I'll start. I got the latest edition here in front of me. We'll work our way kind of 5 down to 1. I'll bring it up. You can provide as much context to maybe why it was picked or something to that effect with it, and we'll go from there. We'll carry on the tradition here. So the 5th market you guys have as a market to watch out for in 2025 is we have the RM of Rosser. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about that market, Peter, and how that market was picked?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I should point out is that these aren't in order of priority. So the approach was to take one market from each province, two in BC, of course.
Okay.
And so in the case of the rural municipality of Rosser, it has a sizable amount of industrial land that's serving Winnipeg as well as Western Canada, and with Centre Port Canada, which is a major inland port. It's attracting, especially in the wake of the pandemic, it's seen a lot more investment from industrial developers that to support distribution networks across Western Canada and the growth of local companies. I also called out the fact that it's got a fairly high proportion of investor-owned properties, which points to its long-standing track record for attracting investors.
Okay.
And I guess it's also kicks off the overarching trend that a lot of these communities are in the path of development. So they're either secondary markets adjacent to larger markets.
That's one thing we've promoted on this show for a long time is secondary and tertiary markets, mainly in BC, because we kind of agree with the concept that these secondary markets are going to get that path of development come right over top of them. For our listeners that may not know where Rosser is, can you maybe give us an idea of like proximity, maybe drive time or kilometers, Rosser to Winnipeg?
It's basically on the northeastern fringe of Winnipeg.
Okay.
Northwestern fringe of Winnipeg.
Okay.
So it's almost indistinguishable. So when people talk about the Winnipeg industrial market, Rosser is part of that.
So here we go. So we've got Rosser. We're kind of in Manitoba. We got Rosser in Manitoba. So if we go over to Saskatchewan next, we've got Saskatoon. Now, Saskatoon's a market in the commercial real estate world for people who sort of followed a lot of the markets kind of heading west, heading east. Saskatoon seems like it's been on a lot of people's radar for a long time. It's getting a lot more attention now than it feels like it ever has. Can you tell us why Saskatoon is the market to watch in Saskatchewan?
Because it's got the research university there, but more important, it's a place where a lot of the offices for the Jansz potash mine are being located. And BHP Billiton has taken extra space in the city's office sector, and it's expected to see a lot more job growth from that particular project.
Yep.
But it's also, as I mentioned, the hub for the research university and also farmland. The agriculture sector is big in Saskatchewan. Farm Credit Canada points to substantial upside to farmland values in the province.
Yeah,
we've seen that, and that is projected to continue so long as, one caveat, of course, so long as the commodity prices stay strong.
Yep.
If there's a drop in commodity prices, that could bring down values a bit, but it's still it's undeniable that we all need to eat every day. So
yeah.
Saskatchewan farmland, with all the row crops there, is seeing strong demand.
Now, one thing too that maybe some of our listeners may or may not know, but like potash, when the war broke out between Ukraine and Russia, that drove a lot of the potash market back over to North America, which it feels like Saskatoon's been the epicenter of that. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on just like what the potash industry is, if you know much about it, for those listeners who may not understand what potash is?
Yeah, and good point about the geopolitical impacts on potash demand. Potash is used in fertilizer, and so it's really one of the key inputs for a lot of the row crops, a lot of the grains, pulses, and feedstocks basically for the livestock sector. And so with demand driven back to Canada, BHP was quite keen and given confidence really to invest in the Jansen mine.
And then, Peter, for our listeners that may not know just how big Saskatoon is, do you know what the population of Saskatoon is by chance?
It's about 350,000.
Wow. So 350,000. So if we're comparing that over here, Kelowna is a market that gets a lot of talk about now. And I believe it's probably around 200,000, I think, is the actual Kelowna proper area. And Victoria is, what would we say Victoria is? Probably 250,000, 265,000 somewhere in Victoria now. So it's a pretty large community in Saskatoon that a lot of people may not be aware of. They've got a lot of major, just trying to put into context, a lot of big concert tours that maybe come through Rogers Arena potentially would also go through Saskatoon because they have the 15 or 16,000 seat arena also in Saskatoon. So it kind of makes an epicenter for that area of business. And like I said earlier, on the commercial real estate side of things, it's been on the radar for quite some time. But now, as you mentioned there about the potash, it really feels like it's come to the forefront. So we definitely have to say that that's a great market to watch in Saskatchewan there. For continuing our trend heading west here, this is a market that you guys pegged last year. I know we've had guests on from this market. We also talked about this market on our top 5 list. I believe it was last year or the year before with William Wright Commercial, although we don't have an office in this community yet. Can you let us know what your pick for the market to watch is in Alberta?
Yeah, Edmonton.
Edmonton, home of Connor McDavid. So tell us more about Edmonton, Peter.
Well, Edmonton, Calgary has been getting a lot of attention and drawing a lot of the population, but Edmonton is sort of flying a little bit below the radar, I think, but it has just as strong prospects, especially when you look at the multifamily investment that's been taking place in that city. Definitely on our done deals page, we're getting a lot more of the multifamily properties that are changing hands.
Yeah.
And it's a market in its own right, but it's also, because it's not Calgary, it's sort of secondary in some respects to where a lot of the attention has been.
Yeah.
But with ambitious plans for the redevelopment of their downtown, you're seeing some investment going into their office space. They've got the ice district up there.
Yeah.
But even that's been reconfiguring to their new downtown plans.
Yep.
But then, just the population growth there is just as significant in many respects what the rest of Alberta is seeing. And so again, that's driven the multifamily investment. That's also driving a lot of the single family investment as well. And we also profiled Leduc, just south of the city, earlier this year, and it's seeing a lot of industrial development because, especially just outside of the city of Edmonton, you've got cheaper rates for development that is drawing in companies that are looking to expand. And that's, of course, driving population growth as well.
We've had a previous guest join us from Edmonton. Her name was Bronwyn. She was an agent. She's a broker over in that market there. I believe she's with JLL now. And she would talk a lot about the industrial market. And I think a lot of people made the assumption that, Edmonton's kind of a government city and all this stuff. But there's a ton of interest in developing kind of from almost like a halo effect, both from not only BC, but also Calgary, as you mentioned, that's now getting into Edmonton, everything from the multifamily side of it to the industrial side of it, and to your point there as well, the office side of it, which we're seeing vacancy rates actually start to creep downwards, although they're still high. And you got to, put them into context, maybe it's 24, 25% from maybe the 30% it was at. But it's a market that we follow intensely at our brokerage all the time, because obviously at some point in time, we do see ourselves with an office in Edmonton. We followed it tremendously, and it feels like a lot of the major asset classes, as you have pointed to, are ticking in the right direction. And I know on the industrial side of things that we get clients over here in the BC side of things, and they'll look at it from a cost perspective of a price per foot to build a product and the price per foot to acquire land. And unless you have to be in BC for some reason, there's a ton of development that's now happening out into Edmonton on the industrial side of things that we're seeing almost feels like a halo effect of tenants that don't have to be here, or developers that don't have to be in Vancouver for any, or BC for any specific reason, are now considering Edmonton as a major industrial market. And it feels like watching lease rates and vacancy rates in that asset class, especially, it feels like rates are going up, vacancy rates are coming down, price of land is going up, which is usually just an intrinsic thing of investors, developers, and owner-occupiers that are now coming into that market to drive it further. So I would, from what I have seen over here on this side of the Rockies, from what we've watched for the past few years, I would definitely have to say Edmonton's a great opportunity. And I think from an investment standpoint, to your point there, Calgary's got a lot of attention, but you always want to buy low, sell high. So I think Edmonton's got a lot of opportunity for people to kind of get in still at this point, and then hopefully ride that wave as it continues to grow and blossom off of the success, not just from Alberta's having, but also what they're getting off of Calgary and the halo effect they're seeing on BC on the industrial side.
Correct. Yeah. And I guess just the other thing I'd add to all that is, being a University of Alberta graduate myself, it's just been fascinating to see the transition in that market and how it used to be pretty oriented towards the oil fields.
Yeah.
But it certainly over the course of my career, it's changed quite a bit, and we've seen a lot of transition that's, again, largely due to the investors.
So, Peter, now that we've distinguished Edmonton as the one to watch in Alberta, let's head back over the Rockies into BC here. You've got two markets that you guys have picked that are near and dear to our hearts over here at William Wright Commercial, because we continue to promote these markets. Let's start with the first one you have in BC, but in the Fraser Valley. Let's go to the Fraser Valley. Peter, what market are we keep an eye on for 2025?
Yeah, I called out Chilliwack.
Chilliwack.
Because it's at the eastern end of the Fraser Valley. It's still highly attractive. I've traveled around with a few friends out here who, see lots of opportunity for themselves in Chilliwack if they were going to move to the Lower Mainland and find a community that's still sort of at a human scale, but with plenty of jobs and employment opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from a personal experience just in the brokerage side of the industry. When I started leasing product in Chilliwack, this is probably like 12 or 14 years ago now,
right,
where Chilliwack could have been its own country, because you'd speak to tenants and investors and all that stuff and try to educate them where Chilliwack was, and they would pretty much look at it as if it didn't exist. And I think one of the challenges was, if you were in Surrey and you're kind of driving that direction, you'd kind of go through Surrey and Aldergrove and Langley, and then you get to like Abbotsford, and you have all these connecting communities. And then when you got past Abbotsford, you kind of drove for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden Chilliwack popped up. And there was so much education of trying to teach people, whether it be investors or even national tenants on the phone back east, where Chilliwack is and why you want to be part of it. Fast forwarding now over a decade later, there's no education needed. People are now calling, asking for space in Chilliwack because they know what Chilliwack is. They've seen the tremendous development in the marketplace. And a lot of these big box tenants are now trying to get into Chilliwack that otherwise Chilliwack was on the radar a decade ago. So tell us more about Chilliwack. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. This is the market to watch in the Fraser Valley, but I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, just on your comments. I mean, I remember covering a couple of industrial developments out there about 20 years ago for business in Vancouver, and it was quite a ways out, but now it's basically bookending the Lower Mainland and Metro Vancouver region, just like Squamish is.
Great point.
And it's seeing a similar amount of fresh investment. The Algro Brothers District 1881 development has brought life back to downtown. But then there's also the Sardis and Greendale areas where there's a lot of good industrial development or a lot of industrial space. You've got Farmhouse Brewing out on the Greendale side. That's
Molson Canadian
animating the community.
Molson Canadian made the big move from downtown Vancouver out into Chilliwack, where you got the big Molson plant now.
Well, I was going to point that out too, because that's right on the highway, and the city has actually set aside that area for agri-industrial development. And so Molson was able to take advantage of that. You've also got the other ag supply companies that point to the strength of the agriculture sector out in that region. So you've got a good mix of job opportunities, but still a lot of the housing remains at relatively affordable prices. And there's also a good stock of housing that could be upgraded or improved.
Yeah. Well, I think even when you're coming into Chilliwack and kind of get onto that Vetter exit there, the Cottonwood Mall project, which was PCI's, I believe it was Nicola Wealth was behind it as well. The transformation of that, mall into what it is and the additional square footage that was added, the Canadian Tire. Recently, the old Canadian Tire building on Vetter had sold, and that sold, which I believe will become a multi-tenanted building. Demand from investors that we see on the brokerage side, Chilliwack is always part of a conversation now, when previously it wasn't. And if you look at COVID, and obviously this is probably a bad comparison only because the money during COVID was so cheap, we were seeing products that were selling in Chilliwack at like a 3.5 cap rate, which otherwise was like a typical Vancouver cap rate, where really COVID got like regional pricing in the Lower Mainland. But Chilliwack was so high up on people's radars at that time. It feels like it's just really spun out of that in a really positive way, where now so many tenants and investors have Chilliwack at the top of their list if they're going to go into that Fraser Valley market. I would even go as far as say even higher than Abbotsford with it, because I think there's just so much opportunity, as you've alluded to.
Yeah, and I think that's partly what the rationale for density buying the site at Lickman Road, at the Lickman Road interchange as well, is that when you go beyond Abbotsford, Lickman Road is that first exchange you hit, and there hadn't been a whole lot of development there, and people want to get into that market. And it's also, again, the closest to Metro Vancouver that you're going to get the other side of Abbotsford.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. No, I totally agree. And then,
You're not going to be in hope for that.
and I think even just touching a little bit too on your point about like industrial and stuff there, unless, like, if you're going to be going up the Coquihalla or going up the canyons or into Alberta, it's a great logistical option for businesses as well from an affordability standpoint, but also from an investment standpoint long term. Unless just getting there and then bypassing all that traffic. Because I know even when I come down from the interior offices back into Vancouver, it can take me like an hour to get through Abbotsford and over the Port Mann, all that stuff. It just bottlenecks right there. It's sort of in the Abbotsford area into Langley. So if you can avoid all that stuff and you can benefit by going up the Coquihalla for your business and using Chilliwack as like kind of your main center point, I think it's a tremendous opportunity both for investors and also owner occupiers. Yeah,
and frankly, when I've come back from the interior, you just want to. It's sort of like the old saying: if you lived there, you'd be home by now, right?
Exactly.
Chilliwack.
Exactly. And then during the summertime, you got Cultus Lake not too far. You got Veta River. You got all these great things. So Chilliwack is number 4 on our list, not in any particular order, but is one of 2 markets that we've earmarked for 2025 to keep an eye on it. So we have 1 market left. This market's near and dear to my heart because we promote this market all the time as what a great investment we think it is. Peter, what is the last market we have left to keep an eye on for 2025? And we're going to Vancouver Island for this one.
Nanaimo.
Oh, couldn't have said it any better. The runway is all yours, Peter. Go ahead.
Yeah, so again, similar to Saskatoon, it's got Vancouver Island University, so it's got a hub for research, but it's also more important in some respects it is that hub like Chilliwack because you've got the ferry connections from Vancouver, but it's also midway between Port Alberni and the west coast of Vancouver Island. So it's a very centrally located market. And in some respects on the fringe of Metro Vancouver, only it's on the island.
Yeah.
And so I've had several friends who moved there and have had family and I would often commute back and forth. And it's long been in a good position, but it's seeing fresh interest now from investors. CBRE's data shows that multifamily properties have been in stronger demand this year than last year, and that should continue into 2025 because the population growth isn't slowing down.
Yeah, no, I think when you look at it too, it almost feels like there's a migration coming up island out of Victoria, as well as prices and housing costs and all stuff become so unaffordable in that market now with the housing crunch that they're experiencing.
Exactly. And it's also got the influx of retirees because you've got Parksville just north.
Yeah. One thing too, I think I'll add to it, I think you guys reported on in the Western Investor, I think it was last year, that this year, maybe they back up, maybe it was last year's building permits or value of building permits issued was another record-setting year on the back of a previous record-setting year, both in commercial and residential development happening in that marketplace, which I think goes to show you from private capital to public capital, lots of people are now looking into Nanaimo as a great opportunity for investing money, not just for the short term, but I think also for the long term with it, because you've got so many points that you made as attractions now that are in that marketplace, population growth that's in that marketplace, proximity to Vancouver, from an affordability standpoint, that if you can work remotely, it's a great option. You've now got, you got the float planes to get to and from in a short period of time. We talk about Nanaimo all the time at our company as a market to keep an eye on. And we know we have had a lot of clients over the years make a lot of investments into that marketplace and done so very, very well financially of it as that market continues to grow and boom. I couldn't say it any better than how you put it. Is there anything else you want to add to it on Nanaimo as one of the top markets?
Yeah, I guess even though there's some provincial restrictions or regulations around investor-owned properties there, it's stood out for me that Nanaimo, like a lot of communities on Vancouver Island, have actually seen a lower number of residential properties that are investor-owned. So there is good room for, I guess, more investors to move in because right now it's below the average.
Yeah. And then I think one thing too, when you look at it, like the pressure that sort of happens on a marketplace as it goes through transition, where now you're getting more investors coming in, you're getting more tenants, both local, national, and international, wanting to be in the marketplace. You're going to get pressure on the lease rates. All that stuff is going to continue to push up, which again makes it a great investor market because maybe you can get a fair market cap rate on lower income only for that income to rise. And now you're getting an above average cap rate on it. So I think we're speaking the same language when it comes to that stuff there. Anything further you'd like to add, Peter? Maybe on any 5 of the markets that we've talked about there? Any other further thoughts on it or anything like that?
Again, these markets weren't in any particular order.
Yep.
And there's a lot of secondary markets that we could have picked, didn't do the comprehensive data dive and stacking up every single one on pure data. But when investors are looking at markets to invest in, it should be ones that they're comfortable with, but also that are in the path of, as we said, of development, so that there is going to be a long-term upside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it comes to comfort levels, I know there's a lot of communities that are facing an upswing in crime since the pandemic.
Yep.
But it helps to have fresh investment to keep things fresh and to get it, change the character of the community so that there is activity, there is animation, an overall refresh that gives hope for the future.
One thing I'd be really interested to get your take on, you've always been covering real estate for a long period of time. I'd be really interested to get your take on your thoughts on the market, where it's at, and potentially watching interest rates fall and inflation come off and stuff like that. Where do you think the real estate market's going in BC?
I take more of a conservative approach, I guess, probably a bit more cautious.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of optimism become muted through policy announcements over the past couple of years. And yet a lot of the fundamentals haven't changed. So I think if we're looking at where real estate is going to go in 2025, the lower interest rates are going to support investor activity.
Yep.
But they'll also be taking advantage of a lot of opportunities and fundamentals that really haven't changed.
All right, Peter, and before we let you go, we got a 6-pack of lighthearted questions that we ask all of our guests. We get to know you a little bit more outside of the office. Do you have just a few more minutes for us?
Sure.
The 6-pack is powered by our good friends over at Red Point Law.
Red Point Law, Cory, Tim, Falco, Scott, and the team. These are great people with a wealth of experience when it comes to commercial closings and private lending. And I just want to say, Cory, not to cut you off, they have a perfect 5-star review on Google.
So for all your commercial legal needs, visit them at redpointlaw.ca, with offices in Vancouver and now open in downtown Kelowna. First one up, favorite band or musician?
I haven't been listening to an awful lot of music lately. It's interesting. My tastes have evolved over the years.
Okay.
Really have tried to take in Tom Russell, an American or Americana artist, whenever he's in town.
Okay.
But I also was just out last night at the Sojourners. They were giving a performance and some in tandem with some early music. So my tastes cross a lot of boundaries.
Okay, great selections there. Looking back on your career, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell your 20-year-old self? What business advice would you give your 20-year-old self now, knowing what you know about your journey?
I would probably say become more involved in formal organizations earlier and not to be dissuaded by some of the challenges.
Good advice.
When I was going through high school, there was a lot of talk about volunteerism, but that's turbocharged in more recent generations. And I think people really also need to have a sense of how associations and board structures operate.
Good advice. Good advice. Next question up. Favorite movie?
I haven't seen very many movies
Okay.
since COVID.
Okay. Do you have a favorite one from back then?
I guess I was always drawn to more of the artsy films.
Okay.
So, Bergman and so forth when I was going through university. But
maybe we'll switch gears slightly here. Maybe favorite TV shows, or favorite TV show or Netflix series or Amazon series you've been binging?
In terms of favorite movie, I've watched an awful lot of foreign films, but I guess if the top hit for favorite movie right now that is The Mission, which was, I think, produced back in 1986.
Okay.
1987. And that's, that stands out for me just in terms of learning how to be free of your burdens and to live into the current opportunities in the current moment.
A book recommendation for our listeners?
I would probably go with a favorite author rather than any particular book. And I don't think readers could go wrong with either something by Thomas Hardy or something by the Polish and Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz.
Okay. Great suggestions there. And last, what's the best advice you feel you've received throughout your career?
I guess it goes back to when I was unemployed back in early 1992 and went to one of the Canada Employment Centers, and they gave me an aptitude test, and I was right down the middle in terms of what all my interests were. So I guess that made me a generalist. And he said the one thing I was probably suited for was being a writer.
And look where you are now.
Exactly. So that's probably that was the best endorsement of my natural skills and talents I had.
So the aptitude test paid off is what you're saying.
Yeah. And then from there, everybody pointed me to the University of Alberta because that had the best literature program at the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And one thing followed from another. The rest is history, as they say.
And there you go. Now you find yourself on a podcast now here with us.
Exactly.
It's all meant to be. So Peter, how can our listeners find out more about yourself or the Western Investor or the latest November issue? How can we find out more about what's going on with the Western Investor?
Yeah. So the URL for Western Investor is westerninvestor.com. And there's a newsletter that readers, investors can sign up for and get a weekly dose of news 3 times a week, actually. And then as for myself, I can be reached at pmitham@glaciermedia.ca.
Excellent, Peter. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate you unraveling kind of 5 markets to watch in 2025 throughout the provinces. We appreciate you taking time and also continuing this on with us because this is year 3 or 4 now we've had this thing on the program here. So we really appreciate taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and all the best for 2025.
Thanks so much, Peter. Take care. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. Our interview with Peter Mitham, editor, Western Investor. I thought the episode was outstanding. And as you could tell by my enthusiasm, we got to BC when he talked about both Chilliwack and then one of our favorite markets, the William Wright Commercial, Nanaimo. We had a lot of comments to share there as well. Both markets in BC, we are extremely excited they made their list because next week we have Rod McKay joining us from our William Wright Vancouver office, which turned into be his annual show with us, breaking down the William Wright Commercial 5 markets to watch out for in BC in 2025. And I can't say for sure, but I would make a very highly educated guess. One, if not both of the BC markets that Peter pointed out will make our list as well. It was great having Peter, as always, to join us there to carry on the tradition that we had with Frank and the Western Investor there, breaking down their 5 markets, what to watch for. And for all those people who listened to last week's episode, I did receive a couple emails about the pizza, believe it or not. This past week, it was Panago at my house this past week. Wasn't as good as Wildflower. So we're going to keep promoting the Wildflower pizza there for Clay and those guys. Tremendous stuff there. I had a couple of listeners that emailed me asking me for more information about Wildflower pizza. So I graciously just sent the website. Hopefully that helps. So thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll be back next week with Rod McKay breaking down the William Wright Commercial 5 markets to watch out for in 2025. Thanks, guys, for listening. Take care.
Subscribe today.